All right, are we ready to do this? I think we're ready to do this.
I think we is, Big. I think we
is.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Bedroom Super Producer podcast. We are your hosts. My name is JT.
And I am BK.
And today we have a very special episode for you guys and gals. We are going to trace back the history of a very special piece of equipment and probably its most well-known ambassador. What are we talking about here, BK?
We're talking about the Mpc.
Ooh, the MIDI
legendary
Production Center, if you didn't know what the MPC letters stood for.
That's right.
Why is the MPC so special?
Why is it so special? Well, I think it's the first incarnation of a sampler that wasn't rack mount back in the days. I think that's why it's special. And also, I think the number one thing, it made the user was able to put his own sound in the machine to sequence the beats. I think that's what was special. You weren't stuck with the generic sound from the box, right?
Yeah, I think the producers came from, the TR-808s and the Linn drums and those kinds of drum machines. And like you said, they could not apply their own, textures or musical tastes to their drum beats.
Exactly. So you could tweak the sound, but you were still stuck with the sound that came in the machine.
Right. I haven't done my research right, but I was thinking while you were talking, did the SP12 and then SP1200s have MIDI capabilities?
That's a good question. Not sure. MIDI was invented by Dave Smith, right?
It was, yes.
Not sure it had MIDI.
Let's ask Google right now. So it didn't. You could purchase some MIDI converters, but basically it was the first drum machine that would literally become the center of a production studio.
Okay, we're talking about the SP.
We're talking about the MPC.
MPC, okay.
Yeah. And so yesterday, preparing for this marvelous episode, I was looking at the MPC 60s video manual starring Roger Linn.
Yeah.
And when you watch that, you can really appreciate all of Roger Linn's genius when it came to develop products for the masses. Because prior to the MPCs, well, yeah, you had the Linn drums by Roger Linn also, but the way he really put the user in the center of his design approach was really unique, I think, at the time on the market. Everything was laid out much more and much more readily available to the users.
Yeah.
Each button had a specific function, and you didn't have to dig through as many menus.
Exactly. There were menus, but I think in 2 or 3 clicks, you were able to get to the parameter that you wanted, the filter that you wanted, either if it was an effect, like a volume knob or something, pretty fast.
Exactly. And I think that was really a big shift, because prior to that, most of these electronic drum machines had tiny screens.
Yeah.
Everything was cramped, and they had the functions, but they weren't laid out in a user-friendly manner.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's one thing that MPC brought. Like you said, also the sampling capabilities, and then the MIDI capabilities allowed a producer to do basically everything in the studio, coming up with drum tracks, synthesizer tracks, bass tracks, and pretty much everything. And I read somewhere that even bass and drum session players had to learn the MPCs in the 80s because they didn't want to lose their job in the studio. So they had to be able to man those boards, quote unquote, so that they didn't lose their jobs.
Wow. Okay. I didn't hear that. Also, one of the great things about the MPC was like what you said, the syncing aspect. It had many different options to sync the MPC with whatever device that you were using. Either if you were taping to like an ADAT tape, or if it was first with the original computers, or if it was like something else, you could sync them, let's say with be it MIDI or word clock or like SMPTE boards. So the MPC were the first machines to have that, and before it was a little bit more loose.
And like you say, the rock solid timing on these machines, and we've learned that the hard way. I don't know if you remember when we were first tracking MPC beats in the Pro Tools, and say we tracked over 2 minutes of music, and we realized real quick that the clocks were different from the computers to the MPCs. And basically what that means for people who've never run into that kind of issue in the studio is that 2 minutes out of an MPC are usually shorter than 2 minutes out of a computer.
Well, the MPC has its own clock. That's why you have to choose like who's slave and who's the master when you're taking. Either you want to keep that Mpc feel, and you're gonna slave your computer or your tape or whatever you're recording on with the MPC, or you're gonna slave the MPC to the clock of your computer.
Yeah, it is a blessing that today all of these clock issues are no longer really an issue the way they were when you were trying to orchestrate into a computer, but basically program and create the foundation of your beats on, say, an MPC.
But it mostly becomes an issue when you want to record like a long sequence. Like you said, if you want to record your whole track, like a 2-minute track in the computer, you're going to have issues if you're not syncing. But usually what we did is that we didn't even sync. We just recorded like 2 or 3 measures, and then we looped them in the computer, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't need to record 2 minutes of kick drums in a row. But for me anyways.
Well, you can certainly loop and use patterns and sequences.
Exactly. And then you just duplicate them in the computer. It depends what, like, I remember people that we work with who wanted to record everything and who really wanted to keep that MPC feel. So it depends. But to come back to what we were saying, the MPC was one of the first machines to have the option to clock with pretty much anything with different protocols. And that was an advantage.
The Mpc Feel. I feel like we need to tackle that. But first, I want to just introduce something that I guess I've seen on Instagram especially, and it's kind of a revival of pad controllers.
Yeah.
And for the kids out there who weren't alive in the 80s to witness the birth of these kinds of drum machines.
That also was a revolution.
Absolutely.
It was the first machine to have pads.
Yeah. The first probably being the Linn 9000, was it? Or the SP12, one of the or the other. When was the?
But the SP12
Linn?
didn't have pads. It had like small pads.
Yeah, they had tiny
like
pads.
Then it would be the Linn. The 4x4. It was the.
Yeah. Well, the Linn 9000 was like a 6x3, 18 pads.
I think so.
Yeah, and they were the first rubber pads, right? So it makes me wonder why there's such a strong revival of these kinds of machines, where when you have computers and basically everything is way faster if you're just using a DAW such as Ableton Live on a MacBook Pro, for example. So why do you think kids are gravitating back to these machines nowadays that you don't need, a MIDI production center, for example?
Like, you mean that they don't use the computer to sequence, like outboard stuff?
I mean, why has it become such a strong focus back again? And you can even see that, for example, in the 2000s, Akai was kind of lost in their product development. They were putting out new, the the 4,000, 5,000, 6,000.
Yeah.
They basically didn't innovate anymore. And then once Maschine actually got on the market, something happened. And I'm just trying to figure out what that was.
Well, I think it was that the Maschine from Native Instrument found a way to combine the best of both worlds, to have that hardware component with everything at your fingertips, those 16 pads, touch sensitive 16 pads, with a major upgrade on the software side, that you could record everything, not be limited in memory. You were able to incorporate many things. Like I think it was on version 2 on the Maschine, you were able to incorporate even plugins from DAWs and everything. So
right.
it was kind of the best of both worlds. And today with Complete, you can use everything that's in Complete. You can use them in the Maschine software. So I think that's what people like. They want the fact that you can touch the controller, the hands action that you had on the MPC, that like the touching feeling and the knobs and everything that you could tweak, with the advantages of the computer and the fast the RAM and all the plugins that you can use. Because the DAW basically is it's very good, but it's very mouse oriented. You click on everything. You have many things, but you're always clicking. And an MPC, it's mostly hardware and limited by memory, limited with those SCSI drives that we used to use and everything. So I think today it's the best of both worlds, that people say, well, I want the controller with the advantages of the DAW.
Incredible how my attention span has grown shorter and shorter. For folks out there who don't know what a SCSI drive is, it's just a big ass disc that you used in like the 90s to store more information than the 3.5 inch discs.
That also was a revolution.
The SCSI discs?
Yeah, for the MPC. The MPC,
of course.
The MPC box was the first sampler to have that big connector that you could connect to those SCSI drives, and you could pretty much import or export any sounds in and out, and you weren't limited by the internal memory.
Yeah.
So you could store a lot of things and just load them up or save them, like back up your MPC. And that you didn't have that before.
And you could also go to your best friend's house with your MPC and not have to carry like 6 to 12 inches high of 3.5 inch discs.
Yeah.
Just to load up your tiny little drum files.
Yeah. It's the
stuff that you can now drag and drop gigabytes worth of in one folder on your computer and call it a day. Right. So from what I could tell from your account, the two things that stood out and that you made me remember actually were the fact that you were no longer confined to a tiny 1 inch by like 3 inch screen.
Oh, there's that.
So the first, I don't remember that quite well, the first OS for the Maschine, but you could actually see it on a computer screen, right? Which was the big difference. You could now see your sequences and patterns on a computer screen, because you have to remember, when we produced on MPCs at first, we had to hear the music and see it in our minds, because we could not see the patterns and the MIDI notes on a computer screen. So it was a very, very different experience producing music on an MPC than it now is on a Maschine. Second thing you've mentioned, and I think really, really changed everything, was the fact that you could load up plugins on separate Maschine tracks.
Exactly.
Whereas previously you had to basically build your sample libraries from scratch.
Yeah.
And like we said, save them on tiny discs or bigger discs, but still you were very much limited with the amount of information you could carry to make your music.
At the same time, do you really need 100 gigs of sound to make a beat.
Well, you know my minimalistic approach to music making. I feel like we're always getting more creative with limits.
Yeah.
In our creative process.
It's another way of making music. Even the fact that you could see what you were doing and the MIDI notes on the screen. I think the music is a little bit different today because we see it a little bit more with our own eyes, and before we made it a little bit more with our ears. So it was less perfect. I don't know if you remember when we were exporting different tracks that were made on the MPC, we realized that there were these little mistakes here and there, and stuff that wasn't quantized the right way, and stuff that was a little bit ahead that wasn't chopped up in the correct way. But at the same time, that's what made the magic of the track, the way it was sampled and everything. So it depends how you see it. I believe that today some producers, sometimes they don't look at their computer screen. And that's the beauty of the machine, is that you can do everything on the machine. You can select plugins and your sounds, and you don't have to look at the computer screen. It's made that way.
So you touched on a very important aspect of the MPC also, and I think it's a great segue now. And you said the phrase, the Mpc Feel. And I feel like that idea has kind of been lost nowadays because of the rapid growth of the technology and the tools. But back in the day, when you were lucky enough to own an MPC, there was this mystical idea that the music and the sound had a different feel when it was coming out of an MPC. Can you elaborate on that?
I think people who started making music on the MPC got used to the clock of the MPC and the swing of the MPC, because the MPC has a particular swing that it applies on the notes, the percentage, the way it applies it.
So what is swing for those out there who don't know what swing is?
Swing is the way you push either a note to the right or to the left of a measure. If you put, like, let's say 0% swing on a note, your note is going to be directly on the measure. Let's say you have a measure with 4 bars and you don't apply any swing, every note is going to be on the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4. On the MPC, usually you apply the swing on the 2 and the 4 on the snares. You can either push it a little bit to the right, so you're going to be a little bit late, or you can push it a little bit to the left and you're going to be a little bit early. And that's what people are talking about when they say the MPC feel. It's the way the way the machine swings the notes, and also the clock of the MPC. So
swing is a set of algorithms to humanize pre-programmed drum beats or beats.
Well, it's a way to make. You could even
apply swing to a bass line or to.
It's a way to make like the notes less precise in a way.
Not on the grid.
Not on the grid. Right. So more, like you say, humanize it, because a human being rarely plays exactly on the grids all the time.
All right, so let me expand on that, because obviously swing was a very big discovery when I first got my first MPC. I now realize that those stuttering hi-hats that certain producers had came from that famed MPC swing, as well as, having the snare a tiny bit late and maybe the clap directly on the grid, which made that splotch kind of sound. And also, in the boom bap, you had the boom, boom, bap, ba-boom, boom, bap, and that ba-boom, usually with a lot of swing, became, kind of on the triplets grid.
Yeah, you pushed
it so hard.
Exactly, you pushed it so far.
A 16th note anymore. It was a triplet.
Yeah, basically. or it could, sometimes when you push the swing very far, it became the last 16th note.
Yeah.
Right?
So To me, that was obviously a breakthrough. Also, what I think made the MPC so special were the filters.
Yeah, the filters were original Akai filter.
So they were analog, fully analog, or were they off of a chip?
I think the filters were like in the machine, analog filters.
Yeah.
But it also came, the effects were digital.
Right.
I think.
Because even the filter had a 128 step increments. So therefore they were kind of calibrated through software somehow.
Yeah, but they can still be like a chip. Like I think there was a specific chip for the filter in the MPC. It wasn't like a processed, like a digital, like a recreation on a chip. It was a chip specifically for the filter.
So for me, that was really where everything changed. Once I realized that producers were stretching out their samples using filtering, say for example, having the verse all filtered out and muffled.
That was a big trick used. Usually you would like cut out the high end to make room for the verse, for the vocals, and then during the chorus you would kick it back to have that full sample, right?
Yeah, and people got very, very creative with these very limited effects, basically.
Yeah, today it's like super simple to do it in the DAW, but way back then to be able to do that in this little box was simply fantastic. Even today, I think it's a good exercise. I think at least once a year to try to make a beat on a limited machine.
Of course. And you also have to remember for the younger crowd out there that if you wanted reverb and delay, you had to purchase a separate chip that you had to have installed in your MPC to have effects. So, like we said, I think the revolution came from the fact that it was a highly portable machine. It wasn't a rack mount unit also, which made it way more, I guess, interactive for several people to be able to stand around this piece of equipment, look at the screen or the pads, and kind of produce music in a more team-spirited way. And
the pads and the fact that it wasn't rack mounted, I think, changed everything.
I think our message, BK, is that when you look at history, you can really appreciate just how far we've came. Because nowadays, people take for granted all of these pad controllers, unbelievable machines, whether it be Maschine or the new MPC Renaissance. I think the newer line of MPCs was
MPC X or something.
What's it called? Anyways, the ones with the huge color screens now. Yeah. And even stuff like what I own, the Rolly, blocks.
The Rolly blocks, yeah.
Those are literally handheld MPCs in a way. MPCs
that you can connect to your phone.
And so, like you said, appreciating sometimes the limitation of these machines helps you understand how some of the old school producers got really, really, really creative
around,
because of the limitation. And I think that's...
but back then, it wasn't considered limitation.
Oh, no, of course not.
It was like the brand new thing. It was like...
The El Dorado
exactly. You had your little studio in your basement. You had your crate of vinyls sampled from your Technique turntable, put it in there. It was like, for me, it was a fantastic time when you think about it, because you didn't need a computer. Everything was in there. You didn't have to rent out a big studio with a big console or musicians or anything. You just came back from work, started the machine, sampled something, and boom, you were your own producers.
You're in a whole new sonic world. And I don't think that there is a more advanced and famed MPC user than Detroit's own the legendary and rest in peace, J Dilla.
Yeah, of course.
And I don't think that anyone would argue that if someone out there in the world has dug deeper into the entrails and the core of this machine, it would have to be J Dilla.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to talk about J Dilla's sound because everything that you hear in his music is a perfect representation of the guts of the MPC, the way it worked, the way the timing on it worked, the swing, the different capabilities, like we said, filtering and mixing even. And so what has captivated you more from J Dilla's works?
In terms of tracks or the way he used the MPC?
The way he uses the MPC.
Well, like what we said earlier,
his technical prowesses, say.
He was very creative with them, with the MPC. I think he made the whole sampling genre evolve a lot because it was a sound that was very particular to him when he sampled it in the MPC. And lots of songs of his are pretty much showcases of what he could do with a sample.
True.
He would like show you the sample. Like producer today, when they sample, they try to hide it. They try to spin it. They try to flip it in a way that you don't recognize the source. It's either slowed down, it's either chopped up or anything. So you're never gonna like today, people don't even want you to know that it's a sample. He did the total opposite. He had tracks that it would start just with the sample, the same key, the track, you would immediately know it was Billie Holiday, blah blah, this year, this track. And then he would flip it, and then he would chop it up, and then he would filter it. And so you could see the evolution of and all his creativity, like what he could do with a sample and how he would chop it and how he would filter it. That for me, that's what I liked about his style. He would never like I've always been very sometimes disappointed when I heard the original samples of like tracks, but I've never been disappointed when it was one of J Dilla's tracks.
Wow.
Right?
That's a really good way to put it. I think that his brain could actually fractalize, if that's even a word, the sample where he'd hear a loop and he'd be able to pick all of the different instances and notes and chords, and he could scramble that thing up in like 16 different ways in one track just to show you that he could.
Like a perfect example of what I'm talking about is on Donuts, Don't Cry.
Okay.
That track, he shows you exactly what he does with the sample.
Right.
It starts with the sample and then he chops it up and slows it down, filters. You like, that's, for me, that's something very creative because he uses it in a certain way. He doesn't just say, this is the sample, it's my track, I just put some drums on it. You know, he shows you that I'm going to show you that I can make something else with it. I can be more creative with it. And for me, that's the art of sampling. Not just finding a great loop that no one remembers and then reusing that beautiful melody and selling it to kids, you know?
I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second, but for me, when Donuts came out, that's when JD lost me. I thought that stuff was unlistenable. Really harsh like, and ear tiring.
It was his it's the last thing he did.
Yeah, it is. Deathbed album. So again, rest in peace to this
very
genius.
Experimental.
Yeah, I think
not easy listening, but very like pushing the limit. I
think that's what makes him so special is the fact that he did not give two fucks about fitting into the mold. You could obviously tell that his biggest inspirations were people like Pete Rock, but they had that clean very quantized sound as far as the drums and the patterns and the sequencing, whereas him, and that's one of the things that we wanted to highlight today about the MPC, is the fact that you can also not quantize your drums. And J Dilla was for sure the first one to have full songs with absolutely no quantizing whatsoever, and no two kicks would hit at the exact same spot.
Exactly.
And for me, for the longest time,
so there's like pretty much, well, if you're not quantizing, you don't have swing, right? If you turn off quantize,
well, it's a different kind of swing. I mean,
but there's no swing. Why would there be swing if you're not quantizing?
Okay, I see what you're doing there.
If you turn everything off, it's just the note is there. It's not gonna be. You push it where you want to push it, and you leave it there, right?
I think that what I mean by swing is the fact that if you're not directly on the grid, on a beat, on the grid, therefore you are swinging either left or right.
But okay, so you're saying there's swing to it. I agree with that. But you didn't apply it in the MPC. You played it.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
That's different.
So he broke the main rule of what a drum machine is, because the magic of drum machines was that you'd have a drummer who made no mistakes, right? Or one of the magical aspects of these technological marvels, with the fact that if you had no rhythm, you could just purchase a drum machine and have rhythm.
And then we realized that we wanted mistakes.
Exactly. And so he came at a point in time where our ears were very much attuned to the sound of people like Pete Rock, DJ Premier, who had rock solid timing in their drums. And he came with this syncopated off time, sometimes it was literally, like I said, a mind fuck. You could not bob your head to the beat and basically bob forward on the snare, because the snare wasn't hitting at the right time.
Yeah.
Anytime. It was always different. And for the longest time, I found it so frustrating to listen to J Dilla, because you could not really bounce to the beat the way you were used to do it.
Yeah. It was kind of like listening to a drunk kid playing the kick drum.
Exactly.
Usually the top stuff, the hi-hat and the snares were all right. The snares would be pushed to the limit, like super late, but you could get used to it. But for me, it was the kicks. Like when the kicks were really like a little bit late or a little bit like too soon, or it's like, it's a drunken kung fu style.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, he was also the inventor of the delayed claps and snares, which were probably popularized by some of his friends, Questlove and D'Angelo, on the Voodoo record, with one of the most sampled clap snare of all times on the song Chicken Grease. So if you listen at the beginning of that track, you will hear that clap and snare that are completely off time. And it's been sampled for Fiesta remix. It's been sampled by Nelly on countless tracks. And so all of this to say that he was the first one to actually layer a clap and a snare in a hip-hop beat in a fashion that made it, and Louis, my brother, would call it wet, where you have the clap hit first and then the snare is off the grid after the beat. And so you got that splush kind of sound.
Yeah. So you're using
like an object that falls in the water. That's why.
So basically you're kind of making delay with notes, and
exactly.
you're using different instruments just to create that that repetition by putting it a little bit to the right. So it's kind of like creating reverb / delay with a note from another instrument. And you do it like today we would say analog, but like back in the days it was like,
but again,
the future.
You have to remember that in order to achieve that sound, you had to break the rules and you had to turn quantize off on one of those tracks.
Yeah, so it would put the note exactly off at the place that you wanted it. It wouldn't correct it.
And so I think that JD pioneered that sound, and then it became a thing, a very big thing in hip hop for all of the early 2000s stuff. Like anytime you'd have an R&B singer on a hip hop track on the hook, the producers subconsciously would go for that clap and snare just to soften it up, give it that soul, give it that smoother feel. But he was the first one to kind of invent that.
Even the whole non-quantized movement, because there was kind of a movement after that. Like people copying him and everything. It was a good thing and it was a bad thing. I don't know if you remember.
Well, I mean,
for me, it was a good thing because it pushed people to experiment and to humanize the way. Because the MPC at the end of the day is still a machine, and turning off the quantize settings in a way is a way to humanize and to put more soul into. Since it sequences already, it's already repeating something, and if you can just give it like you said, a little swing to it and not be perfect, it puts something special into it. At the same time, you have to know when too much is too much. Some people didn't know when it was too much.
Like some people, RZA, for example, on Bobby Digital,
and it was just off. Some
it
people,
was terrible.
Was just off. You're like, ugh. So it had its good parts and its bad effects.
I think it. To your question, it was great for like neo soul and R&B, because again, the R&B that came out of the 80s and even 90s had that very rigid feel, and to have that soul in R&B, you need kind of that very late swing, that really laid back feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so the machines that were used in that time gave it that rigid feel. And once, J Dilla started to work with people like Erykah Badu, it started, and D'Angelo, obviously, through the Soulquarians, it started to feel so much more mellow and organic and humanly.
And even the use of the filtering, I thought, brought back that vintageness that we used to have from the 60s, from the 70s, the way he would filter out the bass, the way he would filter out the kick, that it wouldn't, like all the other rap records had that thumpy, big, like lots of skin on the kick, and his would be super round, and you would put like a low pass on it, it would be super smooth.
I guess you could argue he was the first to have, very filtered out kicks with very, very sharp snares.
Yeah.
I think he pretty much pioneered that sound.
So those Akai filters that you were talking about, he used them a lot.
So for me, what really was the J Dilla sound was, like we've talked about now, syncopation, obviously. It wasn't always like something that was easy to swallow. Sometimes it was a bit too much. He was pushing the envelope too much, but that's what made him a legend. Mm-hmm. It's the fact that he always pushed the envelope.
He never sounded like anyone else. People tried to sound like him.
Something that he also pioneered was the way he would program bass lines into the MPC. Mm. And he would have that knack to actually put, and that's something you taught me, that a bass is supposed to play at the same time as a bass drum. And he would basically have this pleasure of putting the notes either just before or just after the kicks to kind of create this very, very organic backbone to the track, where everything was kind of moving in the same direction, but never at the same time.
And you kind of feel it. It's an effect. It's kind of like an LFO. You're going up and down. The track is going up and down, and you can either pull on the track by putting your bass a little bit earlier than the kick, or you can push on it to give it that feel of like that feeling of urgency, that you're leading somewhere. You can push on it by being a little bit early, or you can pull on it to have more of an ambient, a more like relaxed vibe, and that's what he did.
And also, to your point, but I think that the way the Maschine, the MPC, allowed him to do that, he was almost playing bass lines that were impossible to play by a real bass player.
Well, he could put like notes, note by note, and like you said, do stuff like almost impossible stuff. Well, it's different
because your brain kind of can't wrap its head around, putting all these notes in very, very tight little spaces between the kicks, the stuttering kicks.
Yeah. Well, you have to be, you have to think about it. Like you can play it, but you have to be very precise and you have to know exactly what you want. It's not something that's going to come by feel like automatically for like a normal bass player or guitar player who's played with bands and who's been playing funk, or it's something that comes usually because you've been listening to music made with a particular machine, that with an MPC you have to kind of understand what you're looking for and what you're going for than just the regular band stuff that you want to be on the kick all the time.
I hear what you're saying, but for me, you would need a bass player that's also a drummer, because the way he does it, there's a percussive approach to you would kind of have to hit your bass line with your hands to come up with that groove, whereas your fingers would not be fast enough or strong enough to convey that boop, 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 boop.
That bubble bass that he used to do. And of course, the bass usually came from a pretty iconic instrument.
Yes, and that was my next point. Thank you for mentioning that. Where were those bass lines coming from, especially at the end of his career?
I'm going to say Moog Voyager.
Maybe the most beautiful piece of analog circuitry ever.
Maybe we should get one.
Well, at some point.
They don't make them anymore.
I might get a house first and then...
Well, it's not that expensive. Moog Voyager, what? $3,000?
Oh, at least. I think the rack mount for forever was like $3,500 or something. So indeed, and in the Timbaland episode, I said that Timbaland was the first to make samples and keyboards together cool in a boom bap in New York hip hop era. But I think that J Dilla was the second one, if he didn't do it at the same time as Timbaland, but he was the first one to really throw those super psychedelic, heavily delayed and affected synthesizer over regular or almost regular boom bap hip hop beats.
But he did it in a more, for me, in a more organic way
than Timbaland.
Yeah, a more like you said earlier, more R&B-ish feel. It's something.
It was less eclectic.
I thought it was a little bit softer, a little bit slower. On the Timbo side, it was, like I said, it was the future. It was like quacky. It was a duck on steroids. And for JD, it was something more rounded, a little bit more like not less polished, but a little bit softer.
I think that to that aspect of his career, because he didn't always have those synthesizers. I think that it came towards the end of his career.
Yeah, it was more at the end.
In the last
at the beginning, it was just like sampling, and it was like, for him, it was an art. Like, and the amount of hours he must have spent just crate digging and listening to particular loop, that also was an art. Choosing exactly the right part, the right loop. It's something that we've kind of lost today. People don't spend that much time. They, like you said, they just go through their 100 gig of their bank and try to find that sound. And before, there was something to finding that special record and finding the way to flip it in a certain way and to be creative with it and to use that special magic from a 1965 record or something.
So to that point, I have a few things I want to add. First, I think that JD was the first to really embrace all styles of music.
Yeah, everything.
Because in hip hop, in the late 80s, it was jazz, and then it became, soul, and then it became, it was funk first, and then soul, and then some people came out with the arena rock stuff, people like Dipset. And then, it came back around. But JD would sample anything from bossa nova to, Giorgio Moroder to anything he could put his hands on that was different, he would try to flip it.
Yeah.
And this is a good, it shows that JD was a librarian. And I make it a point in my book, in our book, The Bedroom Super Producer, to really know what your vault has in terms of samples. And I think that he having, thousands and thousands and thousands of records, one of his best friends, I heard in an interview, J-Rock, would say he wouldn't have to look at all of the crates. He could point to you while still producing a beat where that record with that special snare was within, kind of a...
So he knew his vault.
He knew his vault inside and out. And it was said that he had this OCD of how he would classify the records. And it wasn't just by simple alphabetical order. He had this way of putting, eras together and then instrumentation groups together. And he had this out of this world way, supposedly, of
classifying stuff.
And that would help tremendously in an era where you had to wait for the sample to play while you were sampling it. Because remember, the MPC was very time consuming. So you had to have these ways to work to basically speed up these processes to come together, where the inspiration and the skills and the knowledge all come together, and you can create that classic beat, because that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you just get tired before the good sample comes on the vinyl, and you just
you had to record the sample inside, like wait in real time.
Exactly.
And then once it was recorded, you had to save it on the external drive, and then every time you wanted to use it, you had to load it up. So it was, we say time consuming, but back in the days, it was the revolution. Like
it was part of the fun, I guess.
There was nothing, even like just to make people understand, even computers back then couldn't do that.
Very true. Very true.
There was no computer who could record a sample like that and then play it back automatically and have 16 different tracks. And no, it didn't exist.
And effects on the tracks.
It did not exist. It started like what the first MPCs were like 1988, 1989. And the first, normal computers that we could make music with, that would cost like $10,000, $15,000 to have the hardware plus the software. It was maybe in 2000, 98, 99.
Yeah, I mean...
So there was like a 10-year gap where the sampler was king, and Akai, they knew exactly... Like you had limited memory, but the stuff that you could do with that limited memory was incredible.
Because the times you're referencing, the computers, say the old Ataris, they were just MIDI sequencers.
Exactly.
You could not have an audio track on there.
And if you wanted, it was very, very expensive.
Drum machines and synthesizers.
And you had to have special audio cards and whatnots, but that's for another show.
Yeah. So I'd like to close this J Dilla segment with my all-time favorite, because we were talking about the Moog Voyager, and in his last days, he became very experimental, I think, with this electronic sound. And I just want to invite listeners to listen to Let's Grow by Royce the 5'9", which I think premiered on the Sound Bombing, Volume 2 compilation by Ruckus Records and just listen to that beat and look at where hip hop was at when he came out with this futuristic blend of synthesizers and even the little snap that he uses, kind of like a laser gun sound effect. And so it's just amazing how creative he could get and still stay hip hop, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So I think that Let's Grow by Royce da 5'9" is a classic track, my all-time JD favorite.
Cool.
So this was the show for this week.
Yeah. A good show. Interesting show.
I think that we could have gone on for hours
forever.
because both the MPC and J Dilla's knack for weird beats is just it's just a source of music nerdery that you can never
you never get tired of it.
Get tired of it. Go through it. So if you want to support the show, you can go to delicatebeats.com.
Yep.
Get one of BK's Masterful Serum preset pack. Or if you're more on the sampling side, we also have some incredible Contact 5 libraries that you can absolutely load up on your machine.
Trap library, Black Diamonds 2, get that one.
We also need more listeners. So if you've got friends, share the podcast with your producer friends, your wives, your girlfriends, your friends at school, whatever it is. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. So subscribe, leave us a good review if you like the show, obviously. And on this note, we're going to stay camped in the studio because of that COVID-19 thing.
Well, it's a perfect opportunity to make beats, right?
We have no choice. So once again, I'm JT.
I'm BK.
And thank you all for listening. We'll see you in the next one.